Britain. And the reason I'm spending so much time on the US negotiations with Britain is these negotiations were the dress rehearsal and the prototype for the kind of arrangements that America then presented Europe and third world countries with. So England was the weak link in the chain. The weak link, very pro-American and very, very right-wing, that it said, well, if we give everything to America, we know that America will support the upper class. It'll support the property owning class. So we'll give up our power to America because America will prevent any left-wing movement anywhere in the world. And we're Britain, so of course we oppose the left. So this was also part of a global right-wing policy of surrendering to America, figuring out that America would impose on the rest of the world pro-creditor rules and pro-property rules and prevent democracy from developing anywhere. And everybody was terrified that there would be democracy that would actually lead other countries to become self-sufficient and independent. And America and England and then Europe agreed there could not be any democracy in the third world. There had to be dependency. You had to prevent the third world and other countries, including China, from developing their own industry and their own independence. The whole idea was to turn them into colonies or provinces, since there was no longer official colonies. They were economic provinces and basically financial provinces. The result was that Europe and America were obliged to relinquish concepts of their own economic self-sufficiency and reject a return to such policies by joining the appropriate international organizations, the IMF and the World Bank. And that's why the United States took the lead in creating the International Monetary Fund to ensure a post-war system of fixed currency parities, and the World Bank to develop the third world into export economies, exporting raw materials and labor-intensive handicrafts, but not high technology labor, and especially not to feed themselves by growing their own grain. So the IMF was funded by subscriptions that were paid in by member countries, and the voting rights were proportional to the amount of money that was paid in. And since the United States had the most money to pay it in, it got the largest vote, and that is what gave it the veto power that I mentioned above. And any nation willing to join the bank, the World Bank, to get reconstruction loans had to agree to join the fund and promise to service all outstanding and future official government and government guaranteed debts to all foreign creditors. So you had a creditor-oriented system imposed at the very beginning. Now, hardly by surprise, the economic theory and institutional proposals of every country reflect its immediate and short-term self-interest. US negotiators set the stage for a $3.75 billion British loan in 1946, as I mentioned, by terminating Lend-Lease, leaving England without any credit, and that threatened the economy with insolvency if Britain didn't sign on. And the terms of the British loan prevented Britain from devaluing the pound sterling until 1949. That meant that if England ran a balance of payments and trade deficit, as it did, it couldn't devalue sterling to make its exports more competitive. It had to overvalue sterling, and that, of course, kept the value of sterling balances by India, Egypt, Argentina, and other countries high enough so that they could buy more American exports. So sterling was overvalued. It hurt Britain. It helped Egypt, Argentina, and other countries, India, to buy American exports, and essentially made sterling a satellite currency of the dollar, the reverse of what had occurred in the 19th century. So at this point, with the dollar being the central world currency and the dollar being convertible into gold at $35 an ounce, that made the dollar as good as gold because it was convertible. You could go and buy it on the official market, the London Gold Pool. So it was called the gold and dollar exchange standard. The result was that the United States gained $5 billion more in gold from 1945 to 1950 as capital continued to flow to the United States. Other countries saw that their economies were not growing. The United States was recovering. It was a golden age for the United States, the late 40s and early 50s. So the United States continued to build up its own gold. Britain's Treasury representative, Keynes, went to the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference with a plan for an international currency clearing union that would have settled out international payments by putting pressure for adjustment on creditor countries. So there was an alternative plan. The world didn't have to end up the way it was shaped after World War II. There was another way of doing things, and Keynes designed another plan. His plan was for the International Monetary Fund to issue a new fiat international currency to finance deficits. And the currency would be called the Bancor, not the dollar, not the sterling, but the Bancor, meaning it was a fiat currency. Just like the United States today prints dollars electronically and just prints them like greenbacks, the IMF, the clearing union, would provide credit to enable countries to expand. And all these countries would have an overdraft right on the IMF, and it would use its Bancor as a currency as good as the US dollar, as good as gold that was backed by the dollar, backed by gold, which meant the same thing as backing by the dollar. But the IMF would have simply created the currency and let other countries draw on it to finance their imports and to finance their post-war recovery. And Keynes' version did not require governments to pay their subscription in their own currency. In other words, Britain wouldn't have to turn in sterling, France wouldn't have to pay in francs, China wouldn't have to pay in yen, and the US wouldn't have to pay in dollars. It was a pure Bancor. It was an overdraft facility in the clearing union, handled just as accounting credits and debits on the books. And at the point where the balance of payments of creditor countries became unmanageably high, so high that they couldn't be paid, these credits that the U.S. would have for the IMF drawing down its currency would be canceled. In other words, if creditors, if the U.S. became so strong as a creditor position that other countries couldn't pay, the U.S. creditor position would be wiped out. Otherwise, you'd have the kind of instability that you had in the 1920s with the European inter-ally debts and the German reparations. And in fact, Keynes sought to insert a scarce currency clause that would have prevented creditor nations from monopolizing the world's money. But the financial monopoly was just what the United States officials wanted. And US policy was determined to ensure that no alternative would emerge to the US dollar. No special drawing rights by the International Monetary Fund, no other currency as a world currency, only the dollar or gold, or as Americans say, my way or the highway. America enabled its gold holdings to be maintained as the basis of all the international financial system instead of the managed paper credit standard that Keynes had proposed. And having obtained British support, America just turned down Keynes's proposal, and then it turned to continental Europe, and Europe agreed. And so when the war ended in 1945, with the US, IMF, and World Bank plans in force, the US gold holdings stood at $20 billion. And this was about 60% of the whole world's international gold reserves. They rose by another over 4 billion in 1948, and by 1945, the U.S. gold stock reached its all-time high of almost $25 billion. And that reflected the inflow of nearly the $5 billion since the end of the war. So what that meant is that America's reconstruction plans and the IMF and the World Bank didn't help Europe recover. It drained even more from Europe. It didn't help third world countries and colonies recover. It drained even more from them. France lost 60% of its gold exchange reserves between 1946 and 1947. And Sweden's fell by 75%, while the United States continued to accumulate gold. So this inflow showed that neither the World Bank's reconstruction loans nor the World Bank IMF stabilization loans helped either reconstruction or stabilization. The effect was merely to destabilize the economy by making it more and more unipolar on the United States. And the reason I've spent so much time explaining the role of gold in the creditor system and how exploitative it was is that this is the same discussion that is underlying the kind of monetary restructuring that we're talking about in today's world.